Welcome back, everyone. Dr. Angel Acosta here. Excited to extend our conversation. I missed the last podcast conversation, but Drew and Maria had a wonderful dialogue, especially around their experiences of being apprentices and consultants for the Acosta Institute. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge you two and thank you so much for that reflection. I learned so much about just the power of the Institute and the ways that we've been able to support you and others in a really significant way. So just thank you so much for that dialogue. And it just kind of brought up so much for me, because in between that exchange between you two lies the spirit of the Institute. And Maria, you and I have spoken extensively about this, about how do we intentionally nurture not just the culture of an organization, like the culture of the Institute, but the spirit. And I think I really felt the spirit of the Institute in that dialogue between you two. And it brings up a lot for me when you think about capacity building and expanding our skill sets, expanding our horizon, expanding our capacity to not just do more, but be more. And from a traditional perspective around capacity building, you could say that, the culture of an institution supports the ways in which people in that organization have a sense of capacity, or have a sense for tapping into the resources that are available to expand their capacity. From a traditional perspective, culture and material resources like training programs, opportunities to have a level of autonomy when it comes to projects, mentorship, and the ways in which supervisors or people in higher positions support folks who are just starting or on lower ranking roles. But there's something too, I think I left from that conversation around, once you create a culture, once you have an organization with a particular mission, once you have the momentum that is a byproduct of the relationships within the organization and team, what else is at work? And I'm kind of laughing at Drew, because Drew is my psycho-spiritual womanist scholar, transpersonal psychology expert. So I'd love to pick your brain, Drew, first around the spirit of our work, and the spirit of work, and what do you feel there, in regards to that?
Okay, thank you for the question. I thank you for also naming the spirit, because I think that there's words orient us, I think. So when I hear culture, I think differently than when I hear spirit. When I hear values, I think differently than I do when I hear like guiding principles, because I think that I think so much of what makes spirit is the collective, right? So when I think about, and we talked about this, of course, when we were discussing this in our conversation the other day, Maria and I, that it really is the people. It's the people, and it's a collective spirit and energy that drives the Institute. Another thing that occurs to me, there has to be a shape, Angel, and you and Maria have been really amazing with continuing to sort of evolve the shape of things, but you're also very iterative. And I think that that's really important. I think that anything that we hold on too tightly to, and one of your favorite things to say is hold that lightly. anything that we hold tightly to, I think, constricts. So a big part of how we continue to build capacity and expand has to do with that orientation around holding things lightly, but with trust and with care. Right. And I think that that's spirit, that's soul, that's interior. And so, and it's not to say that an organization can't have a culture and have values that they've, sort of oriented around. It's just to say something different comes from our words have power. Our words shape things, right? So when we talk about spirit, I think that just instantly says that there is a collective that is nurturing and feeding a thing, right? Which in this case happens to be the Institute.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Maria?
That was beautiful. With that phrase and that thought, that language shapes so much of it and the language makes a difference. I feel like there's also so much of the work that can't be described. And I know that's like a point of tension with, I know that's a point of tension because often we come to spaces and to courses and to summits and, professional development wanting to know how do I do this? What are the things I need to do to be this? And there's just part of it that is experiential and actually putting words to it is not necessary. When I think when we're talking about the spirit of the Institute, the spirit of our work. And I'm reflecting on just how many times Angel and I have had the same thought. We're physically separated, hundreds of miles, but have had like the same thought, have come to similar arrivals around an idea or a topic or a theme. And how many times Drew and I are in really similar places in our, inquiry and in our personal lives. And, I don't think there's a need to necessarily describe that because it's experiential. But I think when we're talking about the spirit of the Institute, there's so much of it that is indescribable. And I'm actually grateful that it's that way. As you said, it's not just doing more, but it's being more. So that's really speaking to the being part. And with the practice of holding things lightly, I actually read just yesterday, Deborah Eden Tull calls that mindful inquiry, to pose a question, to hold it lightly, and to allow it to organically and naturally unfold. Like allowing answers, insight to organically reveal itself, I think is also part of the spirit of the work.
Yeah, I would love to kind of share a little bit about maybe some of the science or theoretical frameworks that might begin to allow us to name some of what's happening, not just in the Institute, but what could be happening in organizations like ours, where there's a lot of synergy and synchronicity. And, part of what I want to name is that there's a generative social field between us as a team. And this comes out of the work of Otto Scharmer from MIT, Daniel Siegel, systems theory expert Peter Senge. This idea that organizations can cultivate what's called a generative social field, which is a web of relationships that when held, nurtured in a really powerful way can be, I love this word, even though it's kind of dense, catalytic. It can be catalytic. Like it just has a lot of potential for initiating and creating action. So I think that like when Maria and I sometimes will have similar thinking or similar thoughts or similar arrivals at particular conceptualization around a project, and we have it independently, and then we just happen to kind of come. I was just thinking about that. I was just thinking of part of it. If you had to like put one is like that's the generative social field in action. But I think as far as like building capacity and building individual and collective capacity, is that when you have a generative social field, you actually increase the likelihood of synchronicity and synergy to be manifested, right? Because since relationally we're so close, and since we're so attuned to the mission and the spirit of the organization, when we're separate and we're thinking, there's something subatomical there. And I think that's not just for us, and that happens in organizations that are in flow. You know, that's what really is coming up for me, is that we are right now we're in a state of flow, a team flow, collective flow, and it's juicy because so often Western psychological research looks at flow from an individual standpoint. Like, what are the states of flow? Oh, this absence of time, this collapsing of space, all this stuff that's amazing. Special shout out to the Flow Research Collective, by brother Kotler, and incredible work. But what is team flow? What is organizational flow? And then the last thing I'll say is that when you have a generative social field, when people in the team feel like they're rubbing up against the edges of their capacity and they know they can do more because the spirit and the culture of the organization can hold it, that's where there's catalytic momentum, and we can really push the boundaries of what we can do as a small team. Like, we're a really small team. We pack a good punch. And lastly, I also want to say that at the core, from listening to the ways that the Institute has supported your development and my development, what we've been trying to do is build a healing-centered learning environment within the team, within the organization, is to build build a healing-centered learning environment where we can attune to each other's thriving, attune to each other's potential, create conditions where we can expand our capacity, and also lead with integrity in the field. So I'm just really grateful that that's been kind of a central theme, and it happens to be the theme of our healing-centered education certificate program that we teach in the Institute. And we have wonderful faculty that are part of that. Special shout out to Dr. Yolanda Seeley Ruiz, to Dr. Kia Darling Hammond, to Arlene Casimir. Some of our former faculty was Solana Booth and Dr. Latisse Hairston. And the last thing I'll say, just to get any insight from you all around what's coming up for you, at the top of the year, or at the end of last year, we were in the team meeting, and I really wanted to give you a vision for 2025, really clear vision of 2025. And you all know how 2024 was very difficult for me with my father's passing and just navigating a shifting economic landscape that impacted our revenue. And I said, capacity building through healing-centered learning environments. Capacity building through healing-centered learning environments. So just thinking really broadly around the vision for 2025 is really moving forward with how do we leverage all of our infrastructure, all of the ways that we are showing up for the public, including specifically some of our certificate programs, to increase the community's capacity via facilitating experiences, offerings that at their core are healing-centered learning environments.
When we're building our capacity in a healing-centered learning environment, it actually inspires us to create and innovate and iterate more. I think it sparks this potential that, and we talked about this in episode 1, but it sparks this potential and this confidence that, okay, we're creating something that is good work. And then it also, it liberates creativity in a sort of way. Like having the confidence to be creative, but also this ability to dream of really new and sometimes really radical things, like the artificial intelligence certificate program, right? You know, that was, I'll let you speak more to that, Angel, but that was birthed out of just, I think, sheer creativity and confidence that we can. So I think when we're building capacity in healing-centered learning environments, we're able to create more. And then the other thing that came up was when you said, when we hold the space in a good way, there's the generative social field. And I think that there is a field being created no matter what, between a group, in relationships. So it's important that we're demonstrating the quality of that field and the things that we bring that create that quality. Because if someone finds themselves in a team or an organization where there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of mistrust, that's still creating a social field, but not one that's potentiating more creativity or more innovation or iteration. It's creating something else.
Yeah, I really love that appreciate that you named that. You could create any kind of social field. And a lot of the times I'm thinking about building the world we have yet to see. We hear that. We hear that all the time, and there are pivots, though, that we have to make in order for that to really happen. And so it's no small thing to put healing centered, to make that front and center with what we do. It's no small thing. Like that word, that term carries so much. When I think about where I've been thus far with other organizations, what happens when you start out and really begin to say, or when you start something and say, this must be healing centered? That's, to me, that is such a radical way of, that's such a radical nucleus, if you will, for any kind of work. And another thing that comes with that, which is critical to what you were saying, Maria, about the creating, is psychological safety. Like, how many times are we speaking organizations about psychological safety? Healing centered is directly connected to psychological safety. Healing centered is directly connected to environments where people are not having panic attacks or anxiety. And it seems so normal for it to be the other way around. And I'm not saying that, I mean, I feel very fortunate because I'm connected. We are a community connected to other communities who are doing this beautiful kind of work. I'm just naming how important it is for people to really sit with what that term implies, what the term healing centered implies. It is no small thing at all. And it's a radical pivot from the way we've been taught to be doing work, as opposed to creating work from this place of being healing centered. My word for the year, we talked about that. I had to sit with it for a minute, is stretch. It's stretch, and it's so interesting when it came through conversation. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's both physical and it's also like metaphorical, right? This idea of stretching and reaching. There's no way that I would think to stretch were I in an environment where I didn't feel safe to do so, where I didn't feel like there was enough space for me to be like all of who I am and bring all of who I am to a place. And also, we do that for each other. Angel, I think about our conversations and the opportunities that are presented to enable that stretching. But healing centered, yeah, it's no small thing. It's what we need to do if we want to see a different world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to kind of come back to what Maria said about, when you have a healing-centered learning environment, it, as I said before, is catalytic. Meaning it can put another dense word, potentiate innovation and action. And as you said, Maria, like you innovate faster. I just want to kind of zero in on that and slow down, because just to kind of name that in a team where you have this larger healing centered learning environment, everybody's operating from understanding not just, in a cheesy way, that their fullest potential. I think one of the things that I heard in the conversation between you two last episode is how we each other kind of attune to each other's potential. And I think that's significant because it's so often, from a strength-based or 300-degree feedback, it's like, oh, your potential, and then also like, things you got to work on, your growth areas. And I think for us, it's like we also know where each of us kind of need to grow. Like, me, like sometimes I can be a bit, scattered, and the classic joke is, I'll bring 1,000 ideas to the table when we're already working on 1,000 ideas, but we hold those limitations or those growth areas so lightly, and that the way that we see each other, where we're going to be or how we could be, just kind of subsumes any of that growth, and it actually addresses it. And it addresses it. It touches it. But the main point is that when you create an environment that's healing centered within a team, people are less self-conscious. They're less self-conscious because they're conscious of the fact that the space can hold all of them, even the parts that they're self-conscious about, even the parts that they're insecure. Insecurity is not an impediment to action within a healing-centered learning environment. In fact, insecurity can oftentimes be a fuel. It is because I'm insecure here that I'm going to do this in this space. I'm thinking about both of you. You, Drew, with the incredible alchemy of now concept. You had that big concept baking there, working, doing all kinds of papers, and we kind of let's push you a little bit. Let's push you to make it more public. Let's stretch you a little bit, and then you stepping up and doing that so beautifully. And even though you had to finish your doctorate, so you felt a little bit, what does it mean for me to just like really claim these ideas in the general public when I don't have these kind of formal letters next to my name? But the space, the answer is no. You are an expert to us. We want you to express those ideas. Same thing for you, Maria, and it's the same things for me. I'm always most of the things that I'm pushing us to do is primarily because I'm not sure that I can do them myself. So just wanted to respond there that innovation and healing centered learning environments are very powerfully connected. And the last thing I'll say is, if you look back when we started doing workshops, when we started doing courses, and we started doing summits, we had done like 2.5 years of that very successfully, very amazing courses around healing centered education, amazing summits. And along came, thank you to the Kellogg Foundation, they gave us a little bit of resources. And, I started asking myself, okay, we can't just do courses and workshops anymore. We can't just do conferences. We've done that already. We need a couple things to challenge us. We need things to build our capacity. And programmatically, a certificate program was that. So last year in April, we launched our first Healing Centered Education 3-month certificate program. It was huge. It was a huge undertaking. Remember, team, a huge undertaking. And we just like gently just oriented around it. Like it was a big just whale, it was just like, okay. And then if you remember, like we just like we canceled a bunch of things in the beginning of the year just to kind of like, okay, what is this? What is this? And then we got a chance to get 70 people to enroll. The marketing process was a beast to even get people to even convince people that you should be part of a certificate program to help you build healing centered learning environments. It's like literally teaching a consumer to buy a product that they didn't know existed and that they didn't know it needed it. So just congratulations to us for doing that. The final point is that once we executed on this 3-month program, that really was 6 months if you add the months that it took us to prepare, it was exhausting, but like all of a sudden, Drew's word, stretched. We had stretched ourselves and said, wow, we did that. We had the digital infrastructure, we had the person power. And I remember that as we were coming down from the experience, it was July, it was August, and then we looked at each other very boldly and said, let's do another certificate program before the end of the year, which is like, what? And we did it. We did it. We did another certificate program in November from a whole different subject, artificial intelligence. And just for the community to understand is that the execution of the first certificate program stretched us, increased our capacity, and gave us the confidence in what we were doing, so much so that we decided to do another certificate program. And in this second one, we explored a different subject matter that we were noticing was growing in terms of people's interest in the community as far as exploring artificial intelligence. And what I want you to slow down to notice is how capacity begets capacity. The more you create space to build capacity, the more capacity you build. And I think that last year was a great example of that. So anything coming up for you in regards to just me? I know I've said that before in internal meetings around like the narrative of how I view last year's development as a team. Anything comes up for you there? And then if anything, like any memories from having been in the Healing Centered Education Certificate Program, its execution and its content.
What's most present for me is just in terms of thinking, reviewing, remembering what that was like. The first certificate program was the hustle in pulling it together, how energizing it was to engage this. There wasn't a 365 feedback circle afterwards. Like, so next time that we do one of these, what I really want you to think about, there was none of that. It's, and this is how I know that it's possible to do things differently, right? That's just blows my mind. And I'm not trying to paint it as a utopia. What I'm saying is we really can move differently with each other in organizations.
What occurred to me with building more capacity is that we're doing that in the spirit of service and in the spirit of helping other people build their capacity. We're not building capacity to create more things, to have more things and, reach a certain number, right? We're literally doing this work. We're building capacity to build other people's capacity. So there's something there about the spirit of the work when we're looking at it, like when we're grounded in the spirit of the work, that's what's possible. And again, I'm just thinking of our educators. That transmission of building capacity is going to show up in their classrooms. It's going to show up in their relationship to their students. It's going to show up in the way they arrive to the classroom, right? An educator with more capacity arriving in the classroom is so beautiful. It's so beautiful and it's so different. And I've seen it in action and I've been there myself. So I'm getting lit up and really excited about this like transmission of where the spirit of building capacity starts and then where it goes and all of the different directions and people and organizations that it can touch.
Yeah. Just a couple, so much what you're naming, Maria, about, building capacity for us is also in relation to helping others build capacity, right? So it's almost like that. There's a move there that is touches on like an exponential feature, right? So when I build my capacity, and if it's in service to building Maria and Drew's capacity, right? And then they're also in service of building their capacity and each other's capacity in relation to the community's capacity. Now the community is able to build its capacity. Do you feel that a kind of exponential, purpose-driven work? What I want to touch is that it becomes a renewable resource. It becomes a renewable resource. It becomes, again, that word that I wish it was less dense because I've been using it all the time, but catalytic. That it can really move powerful energy, powerful change. So, and our sense of purpose, whether it be just flat, our why of why we do the work, or I think, because basically I think capacity and capacity building is purpose amplified, right? So like, so purpose raw in and of itself, powerful. I know what I want to do. I know why I want to be a classroom instructor. I know why I want to be a professor. I know why I want to be an entrepreneur. I know why. All right, that's your purpose. But then you need support to execute that purpose, and that's what capacity kind of comes in and plays a really powerful role. But thinking about capacity building and purpose as renewable resources is really powerful, because it begins to invite us to consider the fact that sometimes you need resources, but sometimes when you're experiencing a lot of challenges, all you need to do is possibly maybe two moves. One, return to your why, but return to your people, especially people who are ideally in containers where capacity is being built. Ooh. And that's kind of what I heard in your interview, in your conversation last episode. That's what I heard in the communities that come to our programming. And then the last thing I'll say is just the depth of the thinking that we do. As I was hearing Drew and you, Maria, in your conversation, I was just like, oh, I mean, like we do some really deep thinking, But the cool thing is that sometimes you can, as a trained social scientist, I've been in really super academic spaces, and I can do that work, but it gets exhausting. Like it gets too heady. It gets too heady. It gets too theoretical. It gets too, cognitive. There's something about the richness and the way in which we inquire. Which some of this I give it to the culture and the spirit of the Institute that allows us to stay in there for a long time, allows us to stay deep for a longer time, allows us to do that deep, slow work for longer, and allows us to kind of emerge whenever we do stuff with the public. They feel that depth, they feel that deep, that well. There's something here. There's something here. Yeah.
Yeah, I think to almost simplify some of this to something that builds our capacity. I know this for each of you is tending to our well-being. And something so simple, like for me, super simple, going outside and putting my hands in the soil, going outside and giving an offering to the land, right? I was struggling this winter, you both know, struggling with my physical health, my mental health. As soon as I reconnected to the land, boom, my capacity. I'm like, Angel, I'm back. And there's also, just want to offer this to any listeners. That's what I did, brother. I made a land offering. I just want to offer this to any listeners, that it can also be really, really simple, like really, really simple, returning to the earth, returning to your practices and rituals of well-being, whatever that might look like.
Yeah, just real quick, Marie, I gotta acknowledge the 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 reality around your energy. And it's funny when you felt recently like really recharged and really like invigorated, like I was like, I don't thank you, sis, but I don't have a lot of energy right now. And we were able to hold like you coming back full force and me kind of being not in a good space, and you lifting a lot of the spirit of the work and the work around this podcast. I just want to acknowledge that a lot of this podcast is being lifted by the work of Maria, and also Drew. Like Drew sometimes will pull up on a call and be like, yo, I and she don't have to say much. We know. It's like, all right, we see what kind of morning, what kind of day it is, and we just hold that. That's another thing about the wellness piece and being able to attune to where each other is at, and being able to from wherever we are contribute legitimate, genuine knowledge to any kind of process.
Mm-hmm. And in that way, I think that tending to each other's capacities is in that spirit of renewable energy.
I'm just loving the idea of capacity as a renewable resource, and capacity working in such a way that amplifies purpose. I just keep thinking about this all being very dynamic, right? This all being very dynamic. And just the naming of that is, again, I feel like it's radical to name that in a place of organization or a place of working, this idea that we wax and wane like nature does. We ebb and flow. We have things that happen in our lives. And so we don't have to necessarily mask that. We can lean into it with each other. And again, that gets back to, and we've had this conversation together, this idea of like, I think we may have talked about it earlier, but like, what is it that facilitates trust? What is it that enables people to bring the entirety of who they are to a space? Because that doesn't happen all the time. And that is essential, that we're able to be fluid, that we're able to be dynamic, that we're able to become and unbecome. And it informs the work that we do. That's the other part of it. So when we have expectations of people to show up as, let's say, workers, and put another part of themselves to the side, right? The work suffers. The innovation comes from having these experiences and bringing them with us. The innovation comes from the sorts of conversations we have with each other about the living that happens. There's no real box for this work. And I think that is also related to this idea of how, this renewable resource, this purpose amplified dynamic just keeps on kind of replaying in my mind, like how dynamic and fluid and life-giving living in this type of capacity is, as opposed to draining. It's always giving. It's always giving. And I love this idea of purpose amplified, because I think we often think that we have one purpose. And I'm always saying to people, if we're lucky enough, right, we'll be able to do a multitude of things in our life. So purpose is constantly shaping or changing and shifting, and it's constantly moving like we are as well. So I really I'm honed in on this renewable resource. I hadn't heard you necessarily say it like that before.
Mm-hmm.
But that is, that's powerful. It's powerful.
Yeah, I was at a conference at Columbia Teachers College a couple months ago, and they asked me to do a talk on healing centered education, and that came up. That came up in my preparation notes around teacher burnout and finding purpose, and purpose as a renewable resource possibly. So yeah, just as we close out, just celebrating where we are in 2025. 2024 taught us so much. And this year, I'm so excited about all the certificate programs that we're going to execute. It's as funny as we've gotten so confident at doing those, even though we've only really done two. We're like, oh, we're going to do a certificate program for that. We're going to do Alchemy of Now certificate program, Archaeology of Self certificate program, and then we'll talk soon. But I actually have a couple other certificate programs to consider for next year, all of which I think is doable within our calendar. But yeah,
Can I just say something really quickly about that?
Please.
The idea of, this is the thing about certificate programs, because they're everywhere. But what we do, again, teaches people how to create the world we've yet to see. So what you're getting certified to be able to know how to do, right, is more than just a skill. It's literally a becoming. That is what we do. Back to spirit of the Institute, it is a becoming that goes out into the world and helps us to all begin to create the world we've yet to see, but we know is right there. We know it's coming.
Mm-hmm. No, I appreciate that. I appreciate it because, we have two big certificate programs coming. The Healing Centered Education certificate program, with the focus being learning how to build healing centered learning environments with incredible faculty. And then the second one, a month after, is artificial intelligence in education, learning how to apply it. So we're excited about executing on those in the coming months. Check out acostainstitute.com to learn more. But just any last words, Maria?
I think there's offerings for everyone. And I love what you said, Drew, because the way I heard it was, come be with us in this experience, allow yourself to be affected, allow yourself to be transformed. And that's the certificate program, versus come here and learn to do X, Y, and Z in this amount of time. So really, I do think that there's an offering for everyone.
And just to thank you too for that wonderful conversation in the last episode. It really meant a lot to me, and I think you may have heard me discuss this. I bounce between having, formal academic training as a social scientist, but also being an entrepreneur and a community practitioner. And I struggle sometimes with the traditional ways that academic work and research operates around citations. Some might call it the politics of citation, and how you cite, who you cite, where you cite. And my question sometimes is, how do I cite Drew? How do I cite my relationship, Drew? How do I cite my relationship to Maria? How do I cite the feeling I get when I watch Drew and Maria engage in dialogue and in their friendship, and how that friendship and that dialogue radiates out to impact the community? How do I cite our faculty and our programming beyond their writing? How do I cite our Zoom calls with the community? What APA citation format can capture the power of that kind of source? So thank you so much for that conversation. And the last thing I'll say to the community,
can I add one thing? Can I jump in there?
Yeah, please.
Circling back to what I said at the beginning, some things can't be put in language, and maybe they shouldn't be, and I'm grateful for that. Exactly.
Thank you for that. No, and yeah, it reminds me a lot of some of the indigenous scholarship that and wisdom, indigenous knowledge we end up leveraging too in your own tradition, Maria, Solana's, and others. But the last thing I'll say, for those of you who are listening, those of you who have been listening all along, and those of you who maybe are new to the Institute, is that whatever you see us do in the public in terms of programming, it's primarily us experimenting, iterating at the edge of our own insecurities, yet also in the brim of our potential. So anytime you see us do any kind of thing in public, it's an expression of us just being in practice together, unapologetically, whether it fails, flops, or succeeds. Whatever we do will build our capacity. Thank you for listening.